do you see more and more companies moving towards servitization?
Yes, but many more companies want to do it. But one of the big problems is if you're selling products. If, for instance, Akzo Nobel, which is a very paint company,
Yeah.
they're selling marine paint.
Mm.
Well, if I had discussions with people, say, well, what you should do is say, well, can you translate your maritime paint in a reduction of CO2?
Mm.
Then you could say, well, I'm going to sell that capability.
Mm.
But you have to change from a manufacturing point of view to becoming a service organization. And one of the big problems is turning, certainly in big companies, huge companies, turning it around into service companies. So, but you see an enormous trend, certainly with the smaller companies, the startups, what have you, they have that notion already there, but it is certainly from an environmental point of view, is so the reuse and the pay for use and those kind of things.
Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a vodcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to our channel, please consider subscribing to it and hit the bell icon so that you never miss an update. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very senior supply chain leader from the Netherlands, Mr. Willem Van Oppen. Willem, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Willem is the owner of Provoque Consulting BV. He has been in the supply chain for over 3 decades. He has worked as the supply chain head for companies like the Eneco Group, Royal KPN, Philips Electronics, Idemitsu, etc. So, Willem, as I had mentioned to you, this focus today in my conversation is primarily on the supply chain. And I know you have done a lot of work on the service supply chain. So we'll talk service supply chains. First, for our viewers and listeners, tell me, how do you differentiate between a service supply chain and the supply chain that is normally understood for products?
Yeah, there are a few aspects which are different. First of all, you cannot buffer services because services is a people business and an activity business. So you're dealing with capacities instead of buffers. The second thing is that collaboration between the service provider and the service taker is per definition is a case of collaborate. You need to collaborate, otherwise you cannot have services. And the aspect is also that services has a totally different dynamic than let's say the traditional physical supply chain. In physical supply chain, it's a very strong focus on flow. Whereas in the service supply chain, I was talking about capacities, it's work in progress. How much work can you do? How much work do you get? And how overloaded is the system going to be? So work in progress is very important. And then notably, one of the aspects that I've discovered over time is that you see very well designed, and certainly in this pandemic, very redesign of physical supply chain, resilient supply chains, adaptive supply chains, what have you. But in my experience, you do not see many business to consumer companies who really have a priori design of supply chain, but it's done on the way, on the run, with launching, it's being tweaked and what have you. Those are some of the aspects which are, and maybe also the aspect that IT gives the fallacy of very rapid ability to ramp up, which often is not so much the case, because the services supply chain are less transparent than the physical supply chain.
So can you give me some interesting examples of service supply chains across a few industries?
Well, I will address a case. It had to do with the Eneco Group, which is an energy company. They at that time still had a subsidiary in the grid management called Stedin, and by European law, all of those grid operators have to offer by 2020 at least 80% of their customer base smart meters. That was a European law. And that has been translated in the Netherlands, where you have regional companies, and Stedin is one of those regional companies around the Rotterdam area. That was translated into targets set by the Authority of Consumer Markets, so really a government-sponsored thing. And this company, they had agreed to a target of 350,000 meters to be implemented and in 2050. And that 350,000 was based on a pilot that they'd done 1 year before, where they launched about 9,000 smart meters in a very small, very tight Christian community somewhere in near Rotterdam. And then I talked to the director of the company. Said, well, what are your concerns? He said, well, are we able to really have that huge massive ramp up? And I had the same doubts because they split up their processes in 6 sub processes. And the general manager of that smart meter business, he said to me, I have no problem because I have 6 people. This person is doing that, that person is doing that. So really split up supply chain. And so what we then did, we invited everybody who was having a part in that supply chain into a room, had a system dynamic, let's say, sort of process. And it's that famous Indian parable of the 7 blindfolded persons who, whilst talking, discover that, in fact, there is an elephant in the room. And the result, as ever, is that people say, gosh, we didn't know it was so split up, and we didn't know that we were so dependent. But what came about in that process is that the first of all, there was, the assumption that you could multiply and scale up from a very small pilot to 350 was a bit overambitious, because the productivity of the field install engineers was aimed at 8. But when you go to Rotterdam with a very mixed community with lots of electrons, that productivity goes down. Well, you don't need a mathematical project, let's say, model for that. But what also was discovered is that you have, contrary to physical supply chain, you have the usual suspects. You know how your supply chain is. But in the services world, that's somewhat different. And it became the bottleneck of having field install engineers was not so much the demographic and the productivity, but the fact that with smart meters, you combine electricity and gas. Traditionally, we had electricity engineers and gas engineers. So the gas engineers had to be taught electricity, and the electricity had to be taught gas. Nobody knew that was a bottleneck. And the training capacity in the Netherlands was limited.
Okay.
And moreover, the certification capacity was one person in The Hague was doing the certification, and he was bombarded with requests for that. So then it really became, when we did some calculations, that about 225,000 meters beyond that, it will be a total crash.
Okay.
We went with our quantitative model to the authority of consumer market, and we said, the target was 350, but this model shows that it will be a total disaster. With that model in hand, we were able to redistribute the targets over the upcoming years. So it was the non-transparency of bottlenecks in the second tier and even third tier processes, which happened to be the true bottlenecks. Nobody knew that was the case, but we brought that up. We became transparent.
Very interesting.
Maybe another example is somewhat more old. Is that KPN is still the local telco company, and they launched voice over IP in 2006, 2007, but with a massive rollout target, and but the board. I'd seen the presentation. The board made a decision. Automatic provisioning, and people will install the modem themselves. Automatic provisioning was a bit of a problem because we had 35 databases which were not coupled. We had 9 IT systems. We had 11 brands. And automatic, let's say, installation by the customers, we came to the conclusion after analysis that 17% of the people were not able to install those modems. So they needed the field install engineers, but they were being cut out of the process. It was very cheap if people would do that. And that cost the company about 120 million euro. And we were able to be out of pocket cost net promoter score and really the seller.
Mm.
So it was there again that on a very high level, and I often see that in companies on a very high level, a very simplistic view of supply chains,
Mm.
because people, when they talk on board level on processes, it is process. But when you go to sub-process, activity, or even instruction level, that is something they are not interested in.
Very interesting.
I've worked in Japan, Hoshin Kanri, top down and bottom up. That is the true gist to get those supply chains transparent.
Fascinating. So, let me move on. When I was reading about you, there's a word called servitization, which,
Yes.
as I understood, is where manufacturers transform their businesses from selling products towards providing services wrapped about their products.
Yeah.
Can you explain this to me for our viewers and listeners with some example?
Now, one very famous example is Rolls-Royce jet engines. And normally you would associate that an airline buys airplanes and that they can choose their own Pratt & Whitney,
Yeah.
Rolls-Royce, what have you, General Electric
Yeah.
jet engines. But Rolls-Royce went to say, well, we're not going to sell a jet engine, but what we're going to do is we are going to contract
Mm.
the let's say the asset utilization of that engine. So
Mhm.
you just contract refurbishment, repair, maintenance, and you just pay for uptime. So power by the hour. So the moment that the plant is running, you pay a certain fee, but you don't. But the engine stays the property of Rolls-Royce. So
Wow.
and it's from a Rolls-Royce point of view. Naturally, you have a huge fantastic lock-in of your customers, and secondly, you have a return rate which is much longer than the economic life cycle of the jet engine.
Mm.
More recently, electric cars, which are very very popular.
Yeah.
Renault in France, they said, well, we're not going to sell you an electric car. Let's say the car in itself is a platform that you can buy from us, but the battery, which is about the core of the whole thing, the
Mhm.
battery we will lease to you. So the moment that we have a new battery with higher capacities, with a much longer range, you can change your program into an adapted lease.
And,
So
and do you see more and more companies moving towards servitization?
yes, but many more companies want to do it. But one of the big problems is if you're selling products. If, for instance, Akzo Nobel, which is a very paint company,
Yeah.
they're selling marine paint.
Mm.
Well, if I had discussions with people saying, well, what you should do is say, well, can you translate your maritime paint in a reduction of CO2?
Mm.
Then you could say, well, I'm going to sell that capability.
Mm.
But you have to change from a manufacturing point of view to becoming a service organization. And one of the big problems is turning, certainly in big companies, huge companies, turning it around into service companies. So, but you see an enormous trend, certainly with the smaller companies, the startups, what have you, they have that notion already there, but it is certainly from an environmental point of view, is so the reuse and the pay for use and those kind of things, which is, my daughter has a company which is assisting companies in sustainability. There you see the furniture. She has furniture that she has leased from a company who is making furniture, but who is selling furniture which can be reused and again. So you see an enormous trend in there.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost keeping in line with what we see around the world. The millennials and the Gen Zs don't want to invest in anything that they can rent.
Yeah,
they can
absolutely.
Get on a shorter kind of financial commitment.
Yeah, and also from let's say, I will not say emotional, but let's say our kids, they don't want to have a car. Well, for instance, take a car. Naturally, I've run a business, and you always look to, I'm investing in plants and what have you. What is the asset utilization? The asset utilization of a chemical plant, if you're below 95%, there will be questions asked at the board level here, what's happening with you? But if I look to the asset utilization of my car,
Yes.
it's less than 10%, maybe it's 5%. For the rest, it's standing outside. And
Correct.
what I like is that the young generation said, I'm going to challenge us. Why do you have that thing standing there doing nothing, only costing money? So
fascinating.
Yeah.
So, you also spoke about vaccine supply chain, and in the pandemic, the vaccine supply chain is almost a lifesaver for the billions of people we have on our earth. What, in your opinion, can be done to significantly improve delivery of vaccines?
Well, we briefly talked about that before the show, but it is parallel. Let's say we will have other pandemics. So this pandemic, the mistakes are made, but in the next pandemic, you will have a vaccine. A lot of effort is being done in testing the vaccine. Vaccine is being kicked off the stairs 20, 30 times before it's being done. At the same moment that you know that you will have a pandemic, start organizing a stress test on a regional level, maybe European level, on a local level, what have you. Say, well, if we would have a sort of scenario planning, if we would need so many vaccines in such a short time, how does our service supply chain capability look now? And if you have then scenario planning, you can really adapt it. So what we've seen in this current pandemic, we had a huge fight in order to people social distancing, and in order to have the intensive cares and that. But nobody was talking about, I will not say in all countries, but nobody was focusing on the ability of getting the shot in your arm. And it's often that those supply chains, those service supply chains are not designed. And you should design them, stress testing them, have scenario planning, and then having the ability that when the vaccine is there, that you can really run it smoother than it has been happening now.
Amazing. So, Willem, as a supply chain guru, service supply chain guru, I would love to get your perspective on what has been the impact of the pandemic on all supply chains.
Well, I think that one of the things is that globalization, let's say the COVID is a global. I think our the dependence on global supply chain, the outsourcing to China, outsourcing to low cost, let's say, areas, it has demonstrated the enormous, let's say, impact it can have on economies. Like we don't have enough chips in the Netherlands,
right?
But you see that the question marks about should we have really global, extended, very long supply chains, or should we have nearshoring? Should we have the capability of doing it ourselves also? So I will not say anti-globalization, but really coming to the conclusion that you need resilient, adaptive supply chains, and you need supply chains that are able to very quickly be able to provide, for instance, the vaccines also in other areas. And that's what you now see. You are living in one of the most populous country in the world, but you have a huge challenge on thing, and you're the largest manufacturer of pharmaceuticals will have you in the world. But how is the supply chain of the vaccines in India at this moment? Is that really geared towards the local community, or is it geared toward exporting huge of those, let's say?
Well said. Yeah. So I'm going to now move on in the interest of time. There's another very interesting development that is happening as a result of the pandemic. And in your part of the world, working from home was a little more acceptable. In Asia, it was less acceptable. But now working from home is becoming quite the norm.
Yeah.
With so much supplies now to be delivered to people in their homes, what will be the impact on our supply chains?
Now, the supply chains are overburdened. And for instance, I knew that when last April, people started working from home and I wanted to have a new webcam. Any shop in the Netherlands, very nice webcams, but we don't have them available. So you have to wait a few months. So there's an enormous overburden of the supply chain. On the other hand, you now see companies who are very successful, who know that their logistics, their service logistics is the discriminator, are really investing in that. So on the one hand, you see an enormous change in supply chains. You will have joint supply chains where many more products are being delivered by one provider, and in the back of which you have much more providers. So it will become complicated. But I think that also what I sense, what I see myself as a consumer, I don't see too many hiccups at this moment. Within a year, it has become rather smooth.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And what is your opinion or your thought on the use of technology in supply chains? When I started my work, we used to have a simple purchase manager in most companies.
Yeah.
And that individual has now evolved into the chief supply chain officer.
Yeah.
And from a simple, yellow notepad on which all the inventory used to be kept, now, of course, it's going to a different level altogether. What are your thoughts on how is technology going to change supply chain, and what kind of technology is coming in?
Well, again, technology is big data, naturally is very important. But if I just go to service supply chain, what we do, we build quantitative models, which are simplified algorithms, but we buy quantitative. So we construct those models so that with the model in hand, you can have an intelligent discussions. All models are wrong. I don't need to explain to you, but it's the best imitation of what could actually happen. But so you have, with those models, which you can naturally also bake into software, you have a sort of supply chain control tower, which enables you to very quickly make analysis, what if scenarios, and you can even play games. So suppose that we have a hiccup here, what do we need to adapt it from other areas, what have you. So that control tower with all its goodies, that is really I think is the future. And I've seen already some examples of companies who are doing that very well. And
very interesting.
Yeah.
And I've come to my last question, and this question is that supply chains grew and evolved in a borderless world.
Yes.
Now, with countries putting up their borders again, how do supply chain managers or supply chain leaders react? Because now you don't have such easy access to the same products and services that you used to.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. But I think that and that boils also down to the fact, for myself, the best supply chain manager is a guy who's also responsible for procurement. And if you look procurement, not just, I want to get stuff as cheap as possible, but if you look to procurement as a sort of strategic function, who's really able to invite parties from maybe other areas which are locked in, who could climb into your value chain. So for me, it is collaboration with parties who are, but you have to be open, you have to be transparent. If you're transparent on your position, they are transparent, then you create trust, and then you create traction. So it will not become easier, but if you focus on collaborative effort in a supply chain, say, well, this is the consumer, this is my role in supply chain, and those are all the roles upstream and downstream. If you can pull those parties together in a true partnership or in a network, then I think you're able to counter or mitigate or surpass all those relatively minor hurdles of
Amazing.
Yeah.
Willem, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure and an honor speaking to you. I have learned amazing things in my conversation with you, but I think the biggest takeaway is a little slogan that is there just behind you, which is focus on cost, quality goes down, focus on quality, cost goes down. I think that is probably an amazing, if I can use an Indian term, a guru mantra, which is the secret to success of a guru. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. And good luck.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very much honored to be part of your program, and it was a thrill to discuss with you, Ashutosh. Really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Supply Chain Labs was founded in 2019 by investment firm Loomis Partners to identify, collaborate, and invest in 50 of the best supply chain startups over a 5-year discovery period. Supply chain is one of the most core areas for any segment of the economy, and even more so in a large and growing country like India, which needs deep innovation to help bridge the gaps in the physical supply chain, currently amplified even more so with COVID. In a short time frame of 2 years, Supply Chain Labs is already known as India's first and most widely recognized supply chain focused fund and fellowship. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.